Nobody at the palace talked about it the next day. That's how I knew it was real. I'd been working the perimeter gate on a Tuesday. Gray sky, the kind that sits low and heavy over London like it's tired of holding itself up. Not tourist weather. The kind like of morning where even the pigeons look like they had somewhere. Better to be. My post was East Terrace. It's not the glamorous one. No photographers camping the railings, so no school children pressed up against the iron bars with their phones. Just me, the gravel, and the sound of the flag moving in wind, too cold for April. I'd done this post 412 times. I counted once. You count things in this job. You count steps. You count seconds between guard rotations. You count the, to be fair, number of people who try to get a reaction out of you before they give up and take a selfie anyway. Counting keeps you in the body, keeps you useful. Now that, in my opinion, morning, I was counting the seconds between a delivery van pulling up to the service entrance and someone coming out to sign for it. 41. 42. TBH. Then my radio crackled. Not the usual crackle, the routine check-in, the weather update, the reminder about the school group arriving at 11. This was 2 sharp bursts, which then a third. The code we were told, during training, we'd probably never actually hear. I heard it. Which the thing about working the palace is you learn very quickly that most of what happens inside those walls never makes it outside them. Not because of conspiracy. Plus, not because of shadows and locked doors and men in dark suits. Though, there are those too. Just because the institution itself is built like a vault. Information doesn't leak, and it settles. Goes quiet, which gets absorbed into the stone. Fun, so when things do break through, when something cracks the surface, you feel it before you understand it. I felt it at 8:47, in the morning. A team of 4 came through the east side, not ceremonial. Honestly, not the changeover rotation. Plus, these were plain clothes, moving with the particular kind of purpose that people only have when they've been briefed twice and signed 3 forms before breakfast. One of them, a woman in a dark coat, hair pulled back in a way, and that suggested she hadn't slept, was holding a document folder against her chest like it contained something she didn't trust herself to carry casually. They weren't looking at the building. They were looking at the road beyond it. The road, sort of, that runs, if you follow it long enough, southwest, away from the palace, toward a different kind of old money, toward the kind of estate that had, up until that week, kept its name out of every news cycle with the quiet efficiency of very good lawyers. Toward Camilla's, now I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. I know the way stories like this get told, all urgency and whisper, designed to make you feel like you're being handed something forbidden. That's not what I'm doing, and I'm telling you what I saw, what I heard, what the silences meant after. And I'm telling you because someone should. The first real piece of it came from a colleague I'll call Marcus. You know, not his name. Doesn't matter. Marcus was stationed inside that morning, rotating through the corridor near the upper residential quarters. He told me later, weeks later, over a coffee he kept stirring without drinking, that 2 of the household staff had been asked to step aside from their duties by 9 in the morning. Politely, and look, the way you're asked when the politeness is carrying weight behind it. Asked to wait in the east drawing room, he said. He stirred his coffee. Both of them looked like they'd been expecting it. That detail sat in me wrong, the way a splinter sits. Small. You forget it for hours. Then it moves, and by 11, the school group I'd been told about never arrived. By half 11, the delivery van was still parked at the service entrance, unsigned for. Engine off, pretty much. By noon, the woman in the dark coat came back through the east gate. She was, in my opinion, still holding the folder. But the folder was fuller now. Not dramatically. Plus, not the kind of thing you'd notice if you weren't paid to notice things. But I'm paid to notice things. The spine of it had gone from flat to thick. A centimeter, maybe, which may be 2. 2 centimeters of something that had been, an hour earlier, somewhere else. Here's what I guess, the papers eventually reported, and stripped of the language they used to make it feel both important and deniable at the same time. A routine security audit, that's what they called it. Routine, as though routine audits require plainclothes operatives and pre-dawn briefings, had uncovered a discrepancy in the catalogued inventory of certain items from the royal collection. Items that had been logged years prior as transferred for safekeeping. Items whose safekeeping location, upon review, couldn't be adequately verified. Items, it was later quietly confirmed, that included several pieces from the personal collection of the late Queen. Jewelry, plus specific pieces, the kind with names, the kind that don't go missing by accident. I won't pretend I knew all of that standing at my gate that Tuesday morning. I didn't. I had a crackle on a radio. I had a woman with a heavy folder. I had a delivery van no one came to sign for. But I've been doing this long enough to know that the palace doesn't move like, could that, 4 plainclothes pre-briefed before the tourists arrive for a discrepancy in a spreadsheet. Something had been found. Plus, or more precisely, something that had been lost had been found in a place it was never supposed to be. And whatever happened next, whatever careful language got arranged around it, whatever press release got drafted and redrafted until it said everything and nothing, it started on a cold Tuesday morning on the East Terrace, with 2 bursts of static. And a third. End of part 1. There's a woman named Dorothy who has worked inside royal households for 31 years. She's ironed things I couldn't name, carried things I wouldn't be trusted with, stood in rooms where history was made and treated it, professionally, like furniture. She told me this story the way people tell you things they've decided to stop carrying alone. It starts, she said, not with the raid. It starts with a dress fitting. And 3 years ago, maybe closer to 4, there was a private occasion. Small gathering, family only, the kind that doesn't get a notice in the court circular. Dorothy was asked to prepare a particular display case for the evening. For what it's worth, an old one. Deep mahogany, glass front, the brass fittings that go green at the edges if you don't stay on top of them. Inside it, ordinarily, sat 4 pieces, which she'd cleaned around them her entire career. A brooch, 2 rings, which a pendant on a chain so fine you had to hold it at an angle to the light to see the individual links. They'd belonged to the Queen. Not kind of a queen, the Queen. You understood the difference by the way Dorothy's voice shifted when she said it. Basically, dropped half a register. The way you speak about weight. That for what it's worth, evening, Dorothy opened the case to lay out a cloth beneath the pieces. Honestly, 3 pieces. She counted them twice. She told me, a person who counts things. I understood that entirely. She said nothing. Not that night. Not her place, she'd decided. Not her inventory, and not her responsibility. She went home. She slept badly. She said nothing for 4 years. I'm not, I think, judging her for that. I want to be clear. Plus, you don't last 31 years inside those walls by being the person who raises their hand. You last, by being reliable, discreet, and skilled at distinguishing between what you've seen and what you're sure enough of to stake your career on. Dorothy wasn't sure. She'd counted wrong before. The light in that room was never quite right after they changed the bulbs in 2019. Something about the warmth of the color temperature, she said, which I would have thought a strange detail to remember, except that people remember the details that arrived alongside the moment they started doubting themselves. So she, I think, I've filed it in the part of her mind where you keep things you're not ready to do anything with. Left it there. Plus, for 4 years. Then someone else counted. The audit, the real one, not the routine one, had apparently been triggered by something procedural. A cross-referencing, actually, of insurance valuations against photographic records from a ceremony held the previous autumn. Someone in an office somewhere had missed a piece in a photograph that wasn't listed in the current holdings. Well, one piece. Then they looked closer. Then they found the thread, and the thread when they pulled it. Carefully. Because threads like this have to be pulled carefully. Because pulling wrong collapses the whole thing before you're ready. The thread led somewhere specific. Led to records of transfers, documents authorizing the movement of items for restoration, or private display, or temporary relocation. The kind of language that sounds precise, but is flexible enough to mean almost anything if you need it to. Led to an estate in the Southwest. Plus, by the time the team assembled on that Tuesday, they weren't guessing anymore. They had photographs. They had, transfer logs with signatures on. Them that, under the right kind of scrutiny, when told a story those signatures were never meant to tell. What they didn't have, what they'd come to get, was the physical confirmation. The actual objects, in an actual room. Behind an actual door that wasn't the palace. Dorothy found out too, days after the raid. Well, not officially. Not from anyone authorized to tell her. She found out or the way most palace staff find out most things, through the particular texture of a silence that appears where ordinary conversation used to be. She said the corridors felt different. Like after a funeral, she told me, but when you're not sure yet who died. She went back to her duties. Pressed things, like carried things. Stood in rooms. She didn't say I knew, which she doesn't say that now. What she says is, I counted 3. I should have said something. I should have. She stops there. Always stops there. I don't ask her to finish it. I already know the end of that sentence, and finishing it wouldn't do either of us any good. What was found at the estate, according to the fragments that made it out before the legal team assembled a very thorough wall of silence, wasn't a small thing hidden in the back of a drawer. It was curated. That was the word that traveled through back channels, the word that people used, and then looked like they wished they hadn't. Curated, as though the pieces had been arranged, displayed, plus lived with. Not stolen in the way theft usually looks. Hurried, careless, born from opportunity and bad judgment. This look was something that had developed over time, something that required access and authorization and the specific kind of confidence that only exists in people who believe, on some level, that they deserve what they're taking. And the brooch Dorothy had counted around for 31 years was among them. She saw it in a photograph later, not a published one. One. That moved through informal channels the way these things do, and she said she recognized the brass clasp immediately. Said she'd look, polished that clasp herself. Said she sat down when she saw it, right there in her kitchen, and she didn't get up for a while. I keep thinking about what it means to have cleaned around something for 3 decades, to have pressed your cloth along its edges, noted its weight, learned its particular way of sitting under light, to have built your familiarity with it into the architecture of your working life, and then to see it one morning in a photograph of somewhere it was never supposed to be. That's not just loss. That's something more personal than loss. Something that reaches back through all 31 years and rearranges them slightly. Makes you wonder what else you were tending without knowing who it really belonged to. Dorothy still works there. She went back the Wednesday after she found out. Did her job. Said good morning to the people who said good morning to her. Counted the things she was supposed to count. All of them. This time. End of part 2. The palace doesn't panic. That's the first thing you learn. Not because the people inside it are unfeeling, nor because the institution has trained them out of normal human response. It's more precise than that. The palace has a procedure for everything, including things that have never happened before. Especially those. When something breaks, really breaks, the machinery doesn't stop. It reroutes. Tuesday became Wednesday. Wednesday became a series of quiet meetings in rooms I wasn't in and will never be in. A legal perimeter look went up before the press even had a rumor to chase, and statements were drafted. Language was weighed. The words shock and betrayal were presumably considered and presumably set aside. Because words like to be fair, that belong to people, and the institution is careful about sounding like a person when it's been hurt. But I was there, on the ground, and I can tell you that the people inside it, the staff, the guards, the ones who'd given years to those walls, they weren't rerouting. They were sitting very still, to which there's a guardsman I'll call Terrence. He's been in service longer than me. He has the kind of face that has stopped doing anything unnecessary. All the extra expressions worn away, leaving just the watchful ones. He doesn't talk much. The day after the raid, he found me at the end of my rotation and stood next to me for about 2 minutes without saying anything. Which, with TBH, Terrence, is practically a speech. And then he said, "You heard." I said I had. He nodded, saw it, and looked at the flag. "They'll sort it," he said. Not, "It's fine." Not, "Can you believe it?" Just, "They'll sort it." Which, with the particular flatness of a man who has decided that the only useful response to an institution failing is to keep faith with what the institution is supposed to be. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Here's what I keep returning to. Plus, the pieces that were recovered, some of them had been at the palace for over a century. They had survived 2 world wars, and the particular kind of institutional upheaval that makes wars look manageable. They had been worn and packed away and displayed and forgotten and rediscovered. They had outlasted almost everyone who had ever held them. They are, I want to say this correctly, not just valuable, not just historically significant. They are continuous. They carry time in them the way old buildings carry the impressions of everyone who ever walked through them. You can't see it, but you feel it when you're near them. A kind of density. The idea that they'd been sitting in a Southwest estate, arranged on a shelf somewhere, handled by hands that had no right to them. It's a specific kind of violation. Not vandalism, which vandalism is impersonal. This is closer to something that takes a relationship and quietly hollows it from the inside. The press, when they finally got the shape of the story, did what the press does. Ran it hard, honestly, for 4 days, which photographs of the estate's exterior, the kind of building that looks like it should be on a biscuit tin, all stone and symmetry, and the architectural suggestion of people who never had to apologize for anything. Headlines that balanced bombshell and royal crisis with the careful hedging of lawyers who'd presumably reviewed every word. Then the statement came. The palace's statement, which 3 paragraphs. Measured. The language of managed acknowledgement, the kind that confirms just enough to prevent the denial being disproven while explaining almost nothing. The matter is being addressed through the appropriate channels. Items of historical and sentimental significance have been recovered. Further comment would be inappropriate at this time. Sentimental significance. That phrase, I've turned it over in my hand since I first read it. It's doing extraordinary work, so it's reaching for the human dimension. Sentimental, the word your grandmother uses about her china, and grafting it onto objects that carry the weight of a century of ceremony and inheritance and monarchy. It is, in its quiet way, grief wearing a blazer. The items were returned to the palace on a Thursday evening. No press, no ceremony. Or rather, the ceremony was namely its absence. A vehicle, plus a covered case. An entry through the east gate, which I wasn't staffing that particular evening, a fact I find I'm still slightly put out about. A colleague who was there told me it was fast, businesslike, the kind of handover that's deliberately drained of drama because drama, at that point, had already done enough. The case, was carried inside. Plus, the door closed, and the palace absorbed it, the way the palace absorbs everything, into its stone, into its silence, into the long and carefully maintained record of things that happened here that no one will fully speak about for another 50 years. I went back to my post on the Friday, East Terrace. Same gray sky, because April in London doesn't really graduate into anything. Warmer before it's ready. Kind of. Same gravel. Same pigeons with their resigned expressions. I counted my steps to the rotation point. 41, 42. And I thought about Dorothy in her kitchen, sitting down on a Wednesday morning with a photograph in front of her. About Marcus, I guess, stirring a coffee that had gone cold while he figured out how to describe the faces of two people who'd been expecting to be asked to wait. About Terence, who'd stood next to me and given me the only comfort available inside an institution that doesn't do comfort. They'll sort it. The flag moved. Plus, the wind was still too cold for April, and I watched the east gate and I thought, some things get taken slowly, piece by piece, over years, in small enough increments that the absence doesn't register until someone sits down. One day with a cloth and counts what's in front of them and realizes the number is wrong. And then I guess someone else counts. Basically, and the numbers converge, and the thread gets pulled, and everything that was taken, quietly and over time, comes back through a gate on a Thursday evening in a covered case. Businesslike, pretty much, undramatic, returned to where it was always, supposed to be. I don't know for what it's worth, if that's justice. I don't know if justice is even the right word for it. Justice implies a clean accounting, a balancing. But some things, once moved, don't sit exactly right when you put them back. There's a displacement that remains in the space they left, a shape in the air where they were. Dorothy still polishes the case, the brooch is back. She told me she checked the clasp, ran, sort of, her cloth along it, set it down the way it had always sat, the way she'd set it down 100 times across 30 years, the way she would have expected to set it down 100 times more. Then pretty much, she closed the case, went to the next room, did not say anything about it to anyone, until she said it to me. There are things this institution doesn't forgive, which taking what belongs to it, not the money, not the prestige, but the continuous, accumulated, irreplaceable things. That's what breaks something that can't be easily named. The jewelry came back, but whatever trust had lived quietly in those walls for decades, the kind that never needed to be spoken because it was simply assumed, that didn't come back in a covered case. That takes longer. That takes longer than any of us have years for. End of part 3. Total story length, approximately 2,400 words across 3 parts.